name's Katharine and I'm the artist behind Skorka. I wanted to share with you my process for painting a pet portrait in watercolour. So here we've got a photo of a black and white cat called Gigi. So I've got my normal setup. I've got my paint and the palettes. I've got 2 jars of water, a couple of different size brushes. I'm working on paper that I've stretched. It's 300 GSM and it's 100% cotton watercolour paper. And I've got my reference photo to the side. I'm using a black and white photo alongside a colour photo so that I can see the areas of tone more easily. So as with any artwork, I've done an initial sketch and I've also already applied the masking fluid to this, so that's going to preserve the areas of white paper. So I've applied it especially around where her white fur meets the black fur. So a good place to start is with the eyes. I'm using the wet in wet technique where I've put some water down first and then I'm applying the paint on top. So I've started by applying the nice pale yellow, and then while that paint is still wet, I'm just dropping in the other colours that I can see in the eye. I'm using a green to mix with the yellow in the iris, and I'm also using a brown just to put a little bit of shadow into the outer areas of the eye. Okay, so the initial layer's down on both eyes, and I want to let that dry completely before I do anything else. So I'm going to move on to another part of the picture. She's got a really pink little nose, so I'm going to do that part now. I'm just using the Payne's grey, but with a lot of water, so it's really light. And I've just put the pupils in, and then I've put in a couple of shadows on the nose as well. Just beginning to build the layers, working from light to dark. Okay, so I've built up a couple of layers now on the eyes and the nose. They're not finished, but I'm happy with them at the moment. So I'm going to move on to painting the white part of the fur. So it's not that easy to see in the reference picture next to it. There are some shadows on the white areas of her fur. So I'm using a really pale wash of Payne's grey with the wet in wet technique just to add a little bit of definition in those parts where there's shadows. I like to use Payne's grey because it isn't just a grey, it's got a blue tinge to it, and I like to get a little bit of colour in where I can. It's better than just using black and white. So I've got to be really careful about where the paint goes. I don't want to cover the whole area in the grey. I've put the grey on and then moved it to where I need it, and then I've lifted some paint off the page as well. So I'm just going to do this for the area around her nose and mouth, where all the white is. So now I'm going to move on to the chin area, and you can see that there's actually quite a lot more shadow on the white areas of fur, and then she's got that black mark on her chin as well. Okay, so I'm moving on to the darker patch of fur on her chin. Now she's a black and white cat, but I'm not using black paint to paint the black fur. I'm using the Payne's grey, but just a really nice, dark, rich mix of it. So I've put quite a lot of pigment on because I know this is a very dark area. You can see I'm using quite a small, fine brush, and I'm just doing a little bit of negative painting, which is where I'm taking that dark paint up in between where I've put the masking fluid to create the white hairs on the upper lip. Okay, so I'm going to move away from the chin area so that I can let that dry, and I'm going to start on one of the ears. Although she's got some light fur in her ear, actually if you look at it compared to the white fur on her face, it's not that bright. So I've just started with a pale grey wash, And then while that paint's still wet, I've gone in with a really strong mixture of the Payne's grey to start putting in the really dark parts of her fur around the top of the ear. So you can see I've just dropped the paint around the edges and then swapped to a smaller brush, and I'm just drawing that paint into the inner part of the ear, in between where I've put the masking fluid, to try and define some of those the little hairs that she's got in her ears. Okay, so next I want to start moving down onto some of the black fur on her forehead, but before I do that I need to put in some of the detail around her eye, just so that when I do start to put the black fur in, it'll join up nicely. So I'm going to work in quite a large section now, and I'm going to do the right hand side of the face, the whole section of black fur. So I've added it into the darkest areas first, and then I'm using a smaller brush to draw the paint from the dark areas into the lighter areas to give the impression of the highlighted parts of her black fur. So I'm going to let this dry and move on to putting a little bit more shadow in around her neck. So I'm being quite careful around the whiskers and around the top lip, just using a small brush to again do the negative painting and take the wet paint up in between where I've put the masking fluid to define the edge of those white hairs. Now I've purposely added some highlight reflections into the eyes, even though they're not on the picture. It is a painting, so sometimes you need to add these things to give life to your painting. The eyes still look a little bit flat, so I'm going to put some shadow on the top of the iris just to give it a little bit more depth. So I think at this stage the masking fluid's probably ready to come off, so I'm going to let it dry completely and then we'll be taking the masking fluid off and carrying on from there. Okay, so the whiskers. Now you can see in the picture she has white whiskers. But because we've got a white background, we need to define them somehow when they go off the area of white. So what I'm doing is taking a very small brush, a very pale mix of the Payne's grey. Where the whisker comes off the fur and goes onto the white page and disappears, I'm just putting a little bit of definition in there. So I'm happy with that now, but just coming back to the reference photo, you can see on the right hand side, especially across her, under her eyes, on her cheeks, There's some little wispy white bits of fur which show up in the black, so I'm using the white watercolour just to put these in. So I'm just putting these little extra bits of wispy white fur. They're all around her cheeks, and I'm going to add a few in around her whiskers above her eyes and where the black fur meets the white fur on the forehead. And so that's it. I'm happy with the way that portrait's turned out. I think it's a good representation. I'm just going to finish it off by putting some watercolour splatter around the portrait so that it ties in with the background. And the last thing to do is just to sign it. I really hope you've enjoyed watching me complete this watercolour portrait. If you're interested in learning watercolour for yourself, don't forget to subscribe to the channel and check out all the other tutorials. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you again.